sings it? Marvin Gaye and Tammy Terrell. What movie was it featured in about football players? You should know this one. Oh, come on. It's one of my favorites. You remember the Titans. Yeah. Makes me want to go watch it. So yeah, Ain't No Mountain High Enough. Our message today, and just to give you some background on me, I'm Jennifer Shiver. If you don't know me, made a covenant with God a few years ago that if He asked me to speak, I would speak. And so Randy and Kimberly asked me to do the service today in their absence, so here I am. So today we're going to talk about anger management, Moses, and mountains. Got Thanksgiving coming up, and I don't know about your family, but Thanksgiving's always a challenging holiday for my family, so therefore I really don't always do it with my family. I do it a lot with my in-laws because it brings back some memories that I just don't want to remember. So anyway, anger management, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about emotions, and then we're going to talk about a Old Testament figure that is kind of our model for anger and anger management, and then we're going to talk a little bit about mountains and how they matter to us as Christians. So that's where we are. All right. Next slide, Sam. All right, so what are emotions and what are feelings? All right, emotions are not true. They lie to us. So emotions may feel like they're true, and they may feel like they run you, and they may feel like they rule you, but the reality is they don't, and they aren't. Okay? And we as humans, we exchange emotions that we don't like for emotions that we like. Oh yes, we do that. For example, I don't like to feel sadness or hurt. So instead of feeling sadness and hurt, I'm going to turn that into anger. And typically I will turn that into injustice, and I will take that out on people who probably maybe don't deserve it. In our household we call it undeserved anger, and it is a real thing, and we all kind of suffer from that. But if you take a minute and you think about an emotion that you don't like, think about one that you exchange it for that you like. Okay? For me, anger makes me feel powerful. Hurt and sadness don't. They make me feel weak. That's why I exchange it. Okay? But to let you know, and to give you scripture verses as to why emotions do lie to us, I'm going to give you some background on that real quick here. If I can find it. Yep. Jeremiah 17:19 tells us, Jeremiah 17:9 tells us, Jeremiah 17:9 tells us the heart is more deceitful than anything else and is desperately wicked, right? And we always talk about emotions coming from our heart. And that is true, but the heart is deceitful. That's why we have to guard it. And we have to guard it all the time. And then Psalm 51:5 tells us that, Psalm 51:5 tells us that we were conceived in sin, right? Therefore, there is no good that comes out of our heart, and that's where emotions come from. We were created in the image of God. Genesis 1:7 tells us that. Therefore, we have emotions because God has emotions as well. Okay? Created in His image. Therefore, we have emotions because He has some. Jealousy, anger, wrath, happiness, desire, peace, long-suffering, sadness, and hate, right? God hates sin. We know these things, and Scripture tells us these things, that God is a jealous God, right? He wants you and only you. He doesn't want to share you with anything or anyone else. We know He gets angry. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the life of Moses. Wrath, He pours out wrath, right? The song that Sammy sang, sooner or later God's going to cut you down. And I talked about this last time I stood before you. There comes a point in your life when God's not playing with you anymore. Happiness. We know that God experiences happiness. He experiences joy. And we know that He desires you. We also know that peace, right, and joy, He gives us those as well. Long-suffering, He is very patient with us, especially when we are doing things that He doesn't want us to. He expressed sadness, okay? Jesus wept, we know that too, and of course He hates sin. Now, I want to throw this out there and just tell you love, which is kind of the big emotion we talk about, right? Love. Love is not an emotion at all, it is a choice, okay? And not only is it just a choice, but it is also an action. Okay? So love is not an emotion. You know, we throw that out there all the time. You know, I love pizza, I love basketball, I love school, I love my job, I love my friends, I love my... Okay, love is not an emotion, right? Love is action, and love is a choice. Okay? So don't get that one confused. A lot of times we get that confused. All right. Sam, to the side. All right, anger. So what is anger, right? A strong feeling of displeasure or annoyance. What makes us angry? Injustice, stupidity. I'll tell you what, if you, as a believer, if you're walking around these days in this world, it is real easy to get angry at everything. And the just average stupidity, right? And the echo chambers in which we live, and if you don't know what an echo chamber is, it's this: what you are fed, right, because of the things you search on your phone, because of the things you look at stream, because of everybody that is farming your data. The echo chamber that you are fed, right, becomes your reality. So that's good for you, but the person next to you is getting fed the same echo chamber or a different echo chamber, right? So that becomes their reality. So you wonder why we have so much conflict going on in the world today. It's because everybody's angry because they have these false sense of truth because of their echo chamber. So this is why we have so much conflict and so much anger and so much frustration. But anger, what should we be angry at? We should be angry at sin, right? We should be angry at the enemies of God. Now, what does it really mean to be angry? Okay? It's okay to have righteous anger. For example, if someone were attacking our family, right? And Greg was angry about that. My husband Greg sitting back there. If he was angry, that would be righteous anger. That is allowed. Okay? Things that we should not be angry about, you know, are things that we perceive as injustice that maybe aren't injustice, or things that we perceive that are stupid that aren't stupid, or maybe we perceive someone acting differently than we think they should, and these are things we should not be angry at. But the point is that we need to be angry and not sin. Ephesians 4:26 through 27 tells us that we do not let the sun go down on our wrath. Okay? And what happens when we start building up our anger, and building up our anger, and building our anger against people or against things that we shouldn't, and we start sleeping on that anger, it turns into bitterness. And once we get bitter, it is very hard to turn that anger around. Okay? That requires people like me, a counselor, you come see a counselor. Once you get into bitterness, and you have to delve into some of those things that cause the original anger. Now, something that I learned this week that is very profound, okay? Bitterness and gratitude cannot exist in the same brain. Okay? We think about Thanksgiving, right? And how grateful we are, and we do that thing about, you know, the things we're thankful for, and we talk about that at the Thanksgiving table. If you are bitter, you're going to have a really hard time finding something to be grateful for. They all come from the same place in your brain, right? And one can't, two things can't exist in that same part of your brain together. So if you are bitter, you're going to have a hard time being grateful. So we talk about practicing gratitude these days, and it is a very real thing, because if you are bitter, if you're angry, you have to actually practice it in order for your brain to settle back to where it needs to be. So the Bible tells us, Ephesians 4:26, do not let the sun go down on your wrath. And what has to happen for that, right, is for you to be free. And I know there's that line in that song, ain't no mountain high enough. And he says, when I set you free, I told you I would be there, right? So we talk about freedom a lot. But freedom in Christ means, right, that you are able to be free with your emotions as well. And you know what it means? It means that you are able to have conversations with people about your emotions. And sometimes, throw this out there, sometimes it doesn't matter how the other person receives it. It just matters that you have the conversation, right? How the other person receives it is on them. But sometimes it matters that you have the conversation. I think sometimes as Christians we believe, we just need to, turn the other cheek. I think Pastor Randy preached a whole sermon on that, right? But there does come a time when you need to stand. And you do need to stand your ground. And you do need to declare what is right and what is wrong for you, for your family, for those you love. And again, it doesn't matter necessarily how the other person receives it. It just matters that you had the conversation. Now, of course, we want that all controlled by the Holy Spirit, right? So we want to make sure we're in line with what God says, and we want to pray about that, and we want to make sure that our conversations are God-led as well, okay? So take it to Him first. Next slide, Tim. Okay, our example of anger in the Bible is Moses. Now, I don't want to throw Moses under the bus here because he is my absolute favorite. Okay? Moses walked with God and talked with God. He even saw the backside of God. Moses had this amazing, I'm standing up here getting chilled. Moses had this amazing relationship with God. None talked and walked with God but human. Right? Talked and walked with God like Moses. But yet Moses had a problem. He had an anger management problem. And it followed him throughout his entire life. But still, God chose him as a leader. God chose him to model. God chose him to set his people free. So let's talk a little bit about Moses. We've got a lot of scripture to go through here. We're going to start in Exodus. Get there real quick. We're going to start in Exodus 2, 11 through 15. Now it came about in those days when Moses had grown up and he went out to his brethren and looked out on their hard labors. Now just a side note there, the Israelites were always getting enslaved. You know this, right? And we know, God used other people to enslave them because of their sin and to bring them back to God. But also, people like to enslave the Israelites. You know why? Because they had a very strong work ethic. They worked well. Why? Because they worked unto their God. So they got enslaved a lot because they were hard workers. And looked on their hard labors, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. Verse 12. So he looked this way and that, and when he saw there was no one around, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand, killed him, and murdered him. And he went out the next day, and behold, two Hebrews were fighting with each other. And he said to the offender, why are you striking your companion? But he said, who made you a prince or a judge over us? Are you intending to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and said, surely the matter has become known. All right. So Moses is out there. He sees Israelite being beaten, and he kills the Egyptian, and he buries him in the sand. He's a murderer. Right? But there's a piece of that. He looks left and he looks right. Right? He wants to see if anybody is watching before he kills. We would call that premeditated, right? So it does. So Moses is murdering the first degree. All right? He decides he's going to kill this Egyptian, and he does it, and he buries him in the sand because why? He has this moment of anger. And yes, it is a moment of injustice that he is rising up against. Should he have went as far as murder? Probably not. But yes, he has this moment of injustice, and he rises up against him, and he kills this Egyptian. Exodus 3, 1 through 5. Now Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, priest of Midian. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness, and he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see the marvelous sight, why this bush is not burned up. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses, he said, here am I. So Moses is walking. He sees this bush. He goes over to it and he wants to know what's going on. And all of a sudden God starts speaking to him. Okay? Now remember, Moses has fled. He murdered someone. He ran. He is really on the other side of the desert from where he was supposed to be. He meets, he marries. He's tending his father-in-law's flock. And then all of a sudden this miracle appears in front of him, this bush that is not consumed by fire. And he walks over to it and God speaks to him. Remember, Moses is still a murderer. Verse 5. Then he said, do not come near. Here, remove your sandals from your feet, for the place in which you are standing is holy ground. And Moses will undo his sandals, and he will stand beside the bush. And God will speak to him in the bush. 11 through 12. God asked Moses to do a thing, right? And then Moses says, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? And he said, certainly I will be with you. And this shall be the sign to you, that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. All right, this is our first experience with Moses and a mountain right here. Okay? God says, this is what you're going to do. Remember, Moses is still a murderer. God says, this is what you're going to do for me. You're going to get my people out of the land of Egypt. And Moses is like, no, you're not me. I don't want to do this. But God says, I'm going to be with you. And here's the sign. It's a mountain. You're going to worship me at the mountain. Now, Moses and God are going to have this mountain relationship throughout the rest of Moses' life and even into the life after Moses, or after Moses passes on. Exodus 4, 10 through 15. Then Moses said to the Lord, please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither recently nor in times past, nor since thou hast spoken to thy servant, for I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. How many have ever felt like that? I'm feeling like that today, right? And the Lord said to him, who has made man's mouth, or who makes him dumb or deaf, or seeing or blind? It is I. Now then God and I, even I will be with your mouth and teach you what you are to say. But he said, please, Lord. This is Moses begging God, don't make me talk. Please, Lord. Now send the message by whomever thou wilt, but not me. Not me, God, don't call me. Then the anger of the Lord burned against Moses. And he said, is there not your brother Aaron the Levite? I know that he speaks fluently. And moreover, behold, he is coming out to meet you. When he sees you, he will be glad in heart. And you are to speak to him and put the words in his mouth. And I, even I, will be with your mouth and his mouth, and I will teach you what you are to do. All right, did you catch it? God got angry with Moses. Why? Because he's asking Moses to do something for him, and Moses is saying, you haven't given me the tools. Anytime God asks you to do something, he's already given you the tools. Moses fights that though, right? Moses says, I can't speak. So therefore, God says, okay, well, if you're going to fight me on this, you're still my God. But if you're going to fight me on this, I'm going to bring your brother along to help you. But the words are going to come from me. Okay? All right. So we move on. All right. So then becomes the golden calf experience. And this is my favorite lie in the Bible, right? So the children of Israel are down. Moses is up on the mountain talking to God. And God is about to give the children of Israel the 10 Commandments, right? The laws they are to live by as his people. So Moses is up on the mountain. He's away from the children. The leader is away from the people, right? The leader is away from them. So they come up with this whole plan, right? Now remember, Moses was God's choice, but Aaron comes along, right? So Aaron is now leading the people down here. Well, all of a sudden, Aaron decides, let's take all our gold jewelry. Let's take everything we own. Let's make a calf like our neighbors have, because obviously Moses and God have forgotten us, right? This is all based on emotion, right? They are afraid. Again, emotions lie. They are afraid. So they say, we're going to make this golden calf and we're going to worship it because surely God has killed Moses on that mountain. Again, they're afraid. Their emotions are lying, so they make this huge mistake. And they make this calf. Okay? Exodus 32, 19. And it came about when Moses is coming down off the mountain. He has had this beautiful mountaintop experience with God, right? You've been there, you've had those. He's had this beautiful mountaintop experience with God. God has handed him the Ten Commandments. He is coming down the mountain. And it came about as soon as Moses came near the camp that he saw the calf and the dancing. And Moses' anger burned. And he threw the tablets from his hands and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. He's coming down the mountain. He sees what Aaron and the people that God has given him have done, and he is angry. And in a moment of rage, he takes the tablets that God has handed him, and he throws them down, and he breaks them. Then what follows is his brother Aaron sees that he is angry, and he says, Moses, we didn't do anything. The calf just came walking out of the fire, right? My favorite line in the Bible. We didn't do a thing. It just came walking out of the fire. But Moses has more to say. He goes back up to the mountain. He talks to God. And then, Numbers 11, 10 through 15. Moses has this conversation with God. Now Moses heard the people were weeping throughout their families, each man at the doorway of his tent. And the anger of the Lord was kindled greatly, and Moses was displeased. It says, Moses said to the Lord, why hast thou been so hard on thy servant, talking about himself? And why have I not found favor in thy sight, that thou hast laid the burden of this people on me? Was it I who conceived all this people? Was it I who brought them forth? That thou shouldest say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a nursing infant to the land which thou didst swear to the fathers? Where am I to get meat to give all these people? For they weep before me, saying, give us meat. I alone am not able to carry all this people because it is so burdensome for me. So if you aren't going to deal thus with me, please kill me at once. If I have found favor in thy sight, and do not let me see my regiments. All right, Moses is tired of the leadership role that he has been given. He is tired. And he says to God, why did you give me these people? Ever been there? Now maybe you're not the head of something, but ever been there with your family? God, why did you give me this family? God, why did you give me these children? God, why did you give me this mother-in-law? I love my mother. God, why did you give me this aunt, this uncle? Have you ever been there with God? To the place where you are so frustrated that you say, God, I'm tired of this. Let me be done. Moses was there. Moses was there. He was angry. And he's having this conversation with God. I coached volleyball for a very long time, a number of years. Don't do it anymore just because I hate to lose. And that's a true story. I really hate to lose. And Greg could tell you about a story that's been very misrepresented. But a story where I kicked a chair across the gym. That's not how it happened. The story has been greatly misrepresented. It was I can remember it like yesterday. It was a moment we were playing in a gym in Haines City High School. And the reffing was just horrendous. Not that refs ever lose or win a game for you. But the reffing was horrendous. And sometimes volleyball is one of those sports that if you have coached your team well, and you come up against a team that is not playing to the level you are, your team can quickly slide into the level of this team. And it's a very frustrating thing to watch and to coach, and it's hard to coach against. chair, and it was one of those folding chairs, and I just kicked it just right. And the chair just, boom, right there on the gym floor, and there was this silence, right? And I'm just standing there just like this. I'm looking at the girls on the bench, right? And they're like, their eyes are the biggest saucers, and they're looking at me, and I'm looking at them. And the ref says, "Coach, if you do that again, you're out of here." And I said to them, "I couldn't do that again if I tried." And the whole bench just erupts in laughter, right? This infuriates the ref even more, right? So we were done. I mean, the bad calls went from bad to worse to horrible. And it was horrendous. And I think we're leaving, actually, and the fans from ANC are throwing like oranges and stuff at the bus. It was that bad. And I was teaching at Lakeland Christian School at the time. What's it, Lakeland Christian? No, it's Catholic. It was Catholic. All right, so it was just a horrendous moment, just a horrible, horrible moment. Greg said after that he was never coming to any more of my games. And it kept true story. Anyway, so it was that way. And then I had this season when I was at Lakeland Christian School, and it was one of those seasons where we were just losing every game. We were losing every game, and it was just a mess. And I had a really talented team, and we just couldn't get it together. And my setter quit. You know, she was like, "I'm not doing this because we're losing." Then we're in the huddle at the end of practice the next day, and a friend of hers is in the huddle, and she says, "We need her back, blah, 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 blah." And so I say in the huddle, right, because I'm the coach, if that's the way you feel, you need to hit the door. So she did, lost 2 players in 2 days. I mean, it was just that kind of a year. And I am standing, no lie, in the TPA, you call them now, the teacher's conference room where I was teaching at Lakeland Christian School, and I'm just standing there looking at the woods, and I'm really having that moment with God. I'm like, "God, why did you give me this team? God, you know I hate to lose. God, how could you give me this team and not expect me to be angry about it?" And I gotta tell you, God showed up. This little rabbit comes hopping out of the woods. It's raining. This rabbit comes hopping out of the woods, and he's standing there right on the edge just eating grass. And I'm like, okay. Now, I didn't know it then, but I don't know if you know anything about rabbits. I got a course in rabbits last year, about a year ago, and now I know a lot about rabbits, probably more than I want to. But rabbits are prey animals. Everything eats them. And I'm talking everything. Even I have a teacher at school that wants to eat my pet rabbit. Everything eats them, right? And they're only good for about 30 days. That's what they're supposed to do. Rabbits, 30 days, they procreate, they have about 6 rabbits, and then they die. That's just what rabbits are supposed to do. This is what they were created to do, to be eaten. So I'm standing there watching this rabbit, and he's just sitting out there in the rain just eating. Not a care in the world. And I'm like, okay, God, I get it. I'm worried too much about what we're doing here. And you know, again, God showed up. Next game, we won, right? Now, the season wasn't great. It didn't end well. But I did have a parent come to me. We had a very talented player come in. She was a 6th grader, but we moved her up to varsity because, again, I was losing players like flies. We moved her up to varsity so she could play. Private school, you get a little wiggle room in some of that. So we moved her up to varsity, and her mother came to me after the season, and she said, "I am so glad y'all had this season because my daughter needed to learn what it's like to have adversity." And I was like, wow, there it is. There it is. That was the reason. That was the moment. I didn't know it then because I just wanted to win. But again, so we think about that, and we think about leadership positions. Go ahead, Sammy, change the slide. And here it goes. There he is, Charles Barkley, right? The Phoenix Suns. And those of you that know basketball will know this, and I promise you I didn't do this because I knew y'all were coming. But Charles Barkley, in a interview, Charles Barkley said something to the fact that he was not a role model. And basically, he was saying that athletes and celebrities should not be role models to your children. And this was way back in 1991, okay? That parents should raise their children. And there are, I mean, you think about that now in 2023, right? You've got Moms for Liberty, and you've got all these political groups that are actually fighting for the right to raise their children. Isn't that phenomenal? And in 1991, Charles Barkley was talking about this, right? All right, so Charles Barkley said, "I'm not a role model." Okay? Now his words were great, and the lesson he was trying to say was amazing. Well, Nike at the time was kind of losing some money and going through this thing, and so they approached Charles. He says he approached them. Who knows how it all happened? But Charles Barkley did this whole campaign for Nike on "I am not a role model." Now he got a lot of backlash. You know, if you are in leadership, you should be a role model, right? The backlash came from this, though. 2 years earlier, almost to the date, Nike aired the commercial. Charles Barkley, playing for the Phoenix Suns, in a moment of anger, responded to a racist comment in the stands, went to punch the guy, came up in the stands to punch the guy, and he winds up punching an 8-year-old girl. He was suspended and fined $10,000. That's right now, that seems funny, but $10,000. So, Nike aired that commercial almost to the day. And you think Nike knew what they were doing? Of course they did. Barkley said never has he ever had such, we call that marketing now, about who he was because of that commercial. He became a star because of that commercial and that moment. And he said the backlash about "I'm not a role model" and the discussion was really a good discussion, right? Because we are role models if we are in leadership positions, okay? But Charles Barkley had that moment, that minute. Nike, of course, Nike doesn't care if their publicity is good or bad. They want the publicity. And so Nike went on to have this great moment with Charles Barkley, and everybody was talking about Nike, and everybody was talking about Charles Barkley. Now, Moses was in the same position as Charles Barkley. I don't want to do it. Charles Barkley, I don't want to do it. I don't want to be the role model, right? But the thing is, we really, really don't have a choice, right? Because we are called to be a little more than just who we are. 2 Corinthians 1:20. For as many as may be the promises of God, in him they are yes. Wherefore also by his are our amen to the glory of God through us. Because we were created to do one thing, honor and glorify God. We weren't created to win volleyball games. We weren't created to be marketing experts for Nike, right? We weren't created to, whatever it is you may think you were created to do and be, but it was to honor and glorify God. That is why we were created. And therefore, in doing so, we are role models, whether we like it or not. Because everybody, especially now in a post-Christian society, everybody is looking at you. And you can sit out there, and maybe you're not a believer, but if you're going to church, everybody's looking at you. If you're wearing a cross, everybody's looking at you. If you are wearing any of the symbolism, if you are carrying any of the words, if you speak like a Christian, everybody is looking at you in 2023. And they are watching how you behave. And watching with a microscope. Flip the side. All right, so mountains, right? Mountaintop experiences. We talk about this in Christianity a lot. And it's easy to be a role model when you are on top of that mountain and you've had that experience with God. But when you come down to the valley, right, and they built the golden calf, and you're dealing with that stupidity, it's really hard. And a lot of times we have what we call, or what I call, losing our religion, right? And it's a moment of anger, it's a moment of profanity, it's a moment of road rage, right? It's a moment of coming after your boss. It's a moment of doing things out of anger or emotion that you shouldn't do. And they happen all the time, right? But remember, your heart lies to you. Emotions lie. Flip it, Sam. So Moses, let's go back to Numbers 20, 1 through 13. verse 21 through 13. Then the sons of Israel, the whole congregation, came to the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Now Miriam died there and was buried. And there was no water for the congregation, and then assembled themselves against Moses and Aaron. The people thus contended with Moses and spoke, saying, If only we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why then have you brought the Lord's assembly into this wilderness for us, our beasts, to die there? And why have you made us come up from Egypt to bring us into the wretched place? Is it not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there any water here to drink? Then Moses and Aaron came in front of the presence of the assembly to the doorway of the great tent of the meeting and fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Take the rod, and you and your brother Aaron assemble the congregation, and speak to the rock before their eyes, that it may yield its water. Thou shalt thus bring forth water for them out of the rock, and let the congregation and the beast drink. So Moses took the rod before the Lord, just as he had commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly before the rock, and he said to them, Listen now, you rebels, shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? Then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with the rod. And the water came forth abundantly, and the congregation and the beast drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, Because you have not believed me to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given you. Those were the waters of Meribah, because the sons of Israel contended with the Lord, and he proved himself holy among them. All right, so the people are coming at Moses for the, I don't know, zillionth time, and Moses is tired, and he's mad, and God says, Speak to the rock, Moses. Now, the time we did this before, Moses did take the rod and hit the rock. That's what God told him to do, but God tells him this time to speak. And what does Moses do? He takes the rod, and he hits the rock, and he hits it twice. Now, God does provide, right? Because he always provides for his people. He does make water come out of the rock. But then he's got some issues with Moses, because Moses did not do what he asked. Again, there comes a point in your life when God is not playing with you any longer. Whether that is today, tomorrow, into the next week, there comes a point when he's not playing. And he never plays with disobedience. So Moses does not get to enter into the promised land. And in Deuteronomy 34, 1 through 5, God actually tells Moses, climb up on the mountain and overlook the promised land. And this Moses is where you're going to die. So not only does he not get to go in, but God tells him, you're going to climb this mountain. And you're going to look over the promised land. And this is going to be your last days. Now, can you imagine the conversation? I got chill bumps again. Can you imagine the conversation between Moses and God as he is walking up that? Can you imagine the dirt kicking and the rock kicking that's going on? God, you gave me these people. These people are awful. All I did was hit the rock. I mean, can you imagine? And then he's sitting up there and he gets to see that promised land. But he's never going to get to go in it. Can you imagine? You think about times of injustice and times in your life when you're angry with God, and I think I shared a situation in mine and Greg's life where, we question God. I don't do that anymore because of that situation. But those are the times, right? Well, think about Moses next time you get there. Think about him having to climb that mountain. And we always talk about those mountaintop experiences, right? When it comes to Christianity, but I'm not so certain this was a good one. Right? So Moses climbs the mountain and he sits there and he has this conversation with God, and I'm going to assume it turned out good because, go ahead, Sammy. We get this beautiful redemption story because the next time we see Moses, it is in Matthew 17, 1 through 7. And 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John his brother and brought them up on a high mountain themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his garments became as white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. This is the Mount of Transfiguration. The next time we see Moses on a mountain, he is glorified. And look who he is talking to, Jesus and Elijah. Sure, Moses had an anger management problem. He got angry. Sure. Moses didn't do everything God told him to do all the time. Sure. He had this amazing relationship with God, but yet he still blew it. Didn't want to be a role model, or Charles Barkley, right? But yet, when we see Moses again in the New Testament, he's talking to Jesus on the mountain. How amazing. We are not the sum of our worst days. We are role models. We are leaders. God doesn't leave us there, though, and he doesn't leave us there. Why? And here's the best part of this whole story. Despite how our emotions lie to us, despite how we react to them, despite the road rage, the anger, the frustration, the hurt, the pain, despite all that, God created you to glory, to honor and glorify him, and he has given you every tool you need in order to do so. And in the end, guess what? It is all his.